Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to study is the muscles of tongue. It is also another very important topic from the exam point of view. So let's get started. Muscles are developed from occipital myotomes. It is a very important one-liner and frequently asked MCQ. So hypoglossal nerve comes under the occipital myotomes. What is the middle fibrous septum? It is this part which divides the tongue into left and right half. So each half of the tongue has 4 intrinsic muscles and 4 extrinsic muscles. Okay. So what is the function of intrinsic muscle is? It helps in the alteration of tongue shape. And what is the function of extrinsic muscle is the movement of the tongue. Remember, movement, extrinsic, and alteration of the shape goes with intrinsic. Okay, so first we'll study the intrinsic muscles. It has 4 intrinsic muscles, that is superior longitudinal, inferior longitudinal, transverse and vertical. So first we'll start with superior longitudinal muscle. So it arises from the fibrous tissue deep to the mucous membrane on the dorsum of the tongue and midline lingual septum. Midline lingual septum is the same which we have studied here, that is the middle fibrous septum. Okay, don't get confused. Pathway is longitudinally back from tip to its root. From the tip to root, that is from the anterior to the posterior, tip to root, it has the pathway. Then it inserts into the overlying mucosa membrane. What is the function? It shortens the tongue, makes the dorsum concave. It shortens the tongue. This is very important to remember. And make the dorsum concave. Okay. Now next is the inferior longitudinal. Inferior longitudinal has a similar it is similar like superior longitudinal, and it arises from the fibrous tissue deep to the mucous membrane on the dorsum of the tongue. The pathway is also the same, but here we have to remember that it passes between the genioglossus and the hyoglossus muscle. Okay. It inserts mucous membrane at the dorsum of the tongue. It is also similar as the superior longitudinal. Function, it shortens the tongue and make the dorsum convex. Here it shortens and make it concave. But here, if you look, it make the dorsum convex. Okay, this is the difference. Both of the longitudinal muscle shortens the tongue, but one makes it convex and one makes it concave. Okay, you understand? If we look in the image here, so these are the longitudinal muscles which passes from the tip to the posterior part of the tongue. Okay, this is the superior longitudinal muscle and this is the inferior longitudinal muscle. Clear? Now let's get to transverse muscle. So transverse muscle arises from the lingual septum. It runs, that is left to right, it runs from one part of the tongue to the other part of the tongue, left and right, runs transversely. Okay, inserts submucous fibers tissues at lateral margins of the tongue. If this is a tongue, in the lateral margins it gets inserted. Pathway is either side of the midline, deep to superior longitudinal, superficial to genioglossus. These are the things to remember. Okay, what is the function? It makes the tongue narrow and elongated. This is the very important point to remember, that transverse muscle makes the tongue narrow and elongated. Okay, now we'll come to vertical muscle, the last muscle of intrinsic muscles. It is present at the vertical borders of the anterior part of the tongue. It is present only at the anterior part of the tongue and makes the tongue broad and flattened. Just the reverse of transverse muscle. Transverse muscle makes it narrow and elongated. Here vertical muscle makes it broad and flattened. Okay, if we look at the image here, these are the vertical muscles. These are the vertical muscles Okay, and these are the transverse muscles which goes from one part of the tongue to another part of the tongue. Alright, see, these are the transverse and these are the vertical ones. Now we come to the extrinsic muscle of the tongue. They are also four: genioglossus, hyoglossus, styloglossus, palatoglossus. Always look at the first half of the name. It is very easy to remember if you remember the first half and relate it to the part which it is telling. Like for example, genioglossus. Genio means genial tubercles. So origin is always the genial tubercles, and glossus means tongue. So it inserts into the tongue. Okay. Origin is upper genital tubercles of the mandible. It is a fan-shaped bulky muscle. It connects the tongue to the mandible. Okay. Genial tubercles are always present on the mandible. That's why it is written that it connects the tongue to the mandible. Origin: upper genial tubercles of mandible. Inserts as 3 fibers: upper at the tip of the tongue, middle at the dorsum, and lower at the hyoid bone. Okay. But here it basically inserts into the tongue. That's why it is genioglossus. Now function: it protrudes the tongue. It brings the tongue out. It pulls it out, okay, of the mouth. It pulls posterior part of the tongue. It is a life-saving muscle. This is a very important point to remember. As if the tongue, whenever a person's tongue falls backwards, that is into the mouth, it blocks the airway and it can lead to a life-threatening situation. So genioglossus is the only muscle which keeps the tongue protruded. So that's why it is known as life-saving muscle. Okay. The lower fibers are responsible for that. Now the styloglossus. Remember the name. Stylo means styloid process. Glossus means tongue. So it connects the tongue to the styloid process. Okay. Origin is the tip and part of the anterior surface of the styloid process. Styloid always the origin. Glossus is the tongue, and it inserts into the side of the tongue. Function: it retracts the tongue. Okay, it pulls it back into the mouth. So styloglossus. The next is the hyoglossus. Remember, hyo means hyoid bone, glossus means tongue. Connects the tongue to the hyoid bone. Origin: greater cornua and lateral part of the hyoid bone. Inserts into the side of the tongue between styloglossus and inferior longitudinal muscle. Function: it depresses the tongue. Okay. Next is the palatoglossus. Connects tongue to the palate. Origin: oral surface of palatine aponeurosis, palate. Okay. Then inserts into the palatoglossal arch to side of tongue at junction of oral and pharyngeal parts. Function: it elevates the tongue. Okay, closes oropharyngeal isthmus. So here is a trick which helped me remember this extrinsic muscle is that, see, palate comes ऊपर, फिर हायोइड बोन आता है नीचे, जीनियल ट्यूबरकल मैंडिबल में आगे आता है और पीछे स्टाइलॉइड प्रोसेस आता है. ओके, दिस इज पैलेट, दिस इज हायोइड बोन, this is styloid process and this is genial tubercles of mandible. So always remember ये आगे है तो it helps in protruding the tongue, that is the genioglossus muscles helps in protruding the tongue. Okay, next is styloglossus. it retracts the tongue. तो ये पीछे है तो ये रिट्रैक्ट करेगा. ठीक है, ऐसे मैंने याद रखा है, एक सिर्फ ट्रिक है सिंपल याद रखने के लिए. फिर पैलेटोग्लॉसस ये ऊपर ले जाता है, इट एलिवेट्स दी टंग. ओके, ये हमने पढ़ा अभी. और नीचे हायोइड बोन, हायोग्लॉसस, इट डिप्रेसेस दी टंग. So as to simply summarize this topic, let's look at this image which is given in the BDC, our anatomy book. This is the coronal section of the tongue showing 4 intrinsic and 4 extrinsic muscles. Right? We have seen that this is the median fibrous septum which divides into left and right half. Each has four intrinsic and extrinsic muscle. Intrinsic muscle has the function of providing the shape and extrinsic muscle has the function of providing the movement of the tongue. As we look here, vertical, transverse, inferior longitudinal and superior longitudinal are the intrinsic muscles. The name is same as that of its course. Vertically passing, vertical muscles, transverse, that is from left to the right side. This is the transverse muscle. Superior longitudinal, that is from the tip to the posterior part. Similarly, inferior longitudinal muscles. Its name is inferior because it is present inferiorly, and superior because it is placed superiorly. Simple. So, this was the intrinsic muscle. Now the extrinsic muscle, that is genioglossus, hyoglossus, styloglossus and palatoglossus. Genioglossus, which arises from the genial tubercles of the mandible. So this is the genioglossus, fan-shaped muscle, life-saving muscle, remember that. Then hyoglossus from the hyoid bone, greater cornu of the hyoid bone, and styloglossus, which arises from the styloid process. So this is the styloglossus. Simple. So this was the very important topic which is very frequently asked in exams. It is also asked as a 7 marker or a long question in university exams. So if you have any doubts regarding this topic, you can drop your doubt in the comment sections below, and thank you for watching my video.